All right, this is a little Bible study, and I'm using this debate between Alex O'Connor and Dinesh D'Souza kind of as a backboard, going over subjects that Alex brings out as points of contention. And so in the last video, I want to do a little recap. On the first point that he makes, he has difficulty understanding the genealogies that are recorded in Matthew and in Luke. And so let's spend a couple, maybe 10 minutes there. And then I want to go into number 2, which is really the Nativity story. And I think that's something that we should all know for ourselves. And we'll look at both these. So let's listen to this short clip of Alex talking about, just commenting on these 2 different genealogies. And we'll go into our little recap.
Here there's a lot to talk about. We begin with the birth narratives. There are 2 birth narratives in the Gospels, in Matthew and Luke. Both give different accounts. Both have a genealogy of Jesus, for example, but the genealogies are different. I'm told this is because one records Mary's genealogy and one records Joseph's. You can do this if you like. It doesn't seem like the most natural reading of the text if you're not already predisposed to synchronize the accounts.
So for Alex, it's not natural to him to see these 2 genealogies recorded as a paternal and maternal ancestry. But what we saw in the last video is, if you just go into a Google search, you see that in Judaism, it says here that they are traditionally matrilinear. And this was important to the Jewish people. Think that the word Jew comes from Judah. That's one of the 12 tribes of Israel. And all of the Israelites, they knew very well that the Messiah would come through the tribe of Judah, and specifically through the line of David. Okay, and there are many different prophecies in the Old Testament that say that. And so, every responsible descendant of David, whether a woman or a man, would keep track of their lineage. And that's why you have paternal and maternal record. And something else that we looked at, here this AI-produced response when typing in 2 genealogies of Jesus. I want to elaborate a little further here on the number of generations, because here in Matthew, this is the paternal line where we have 27 generations from David to Joseph. And then in Luke, we have the maternal line being 42 generations. So why are there more women here listed than men? Well, that's because women on average have children at a younger age than men. Okay, and we could actually figure this out mathematically. It's quite easy. Remember, we're looking at from David to Joseph. And so if we go to a calculator, and David's son was Solomon, who was born around 1010 or 5 BC. And then we have Christ, who was born 4 BC. And so this comes out to almost exactly 1,000 years. And so if you divide 27 generations in the paternal line, then it comes out to an average age of 37 that these men fathered their children, which historically is accurate. Men had to be more established. They had to develop their trade, etc. Whereas we know that women were younger. 1,000 years divided by 42, and the average rounding up would have been 24 years of age for the maternal line. Okay. Going back to the number of generations, one other thing that I wanted to point out. Okay, so and this is a deep point, and you can meditate on this further. I'm not going to spend that much time on it, but Alex and others will say that Matthew and Luke, that they contradict each other. We're going to find more and more they actually harmonize with one another than contradict. And as far as the generations are concerned, right, you have 27 generations of men and then 42 generations of women, right? And so if you add that together, you have 69 generations from David to Joseph, or 69 households. And if you think about it, that makes Christ the 70th household. That's not an accident. This is very, 70 is very symbolic in the scriptures. There's a lot of verses that point to this. And, it symbolizes completion and more that I don't want to go into. But the Bible describes us as living stones and Christ as the chief cornerstone, coming together to make the house of God. And here we are, the 70th generation, or the 70th house from David being Christ, again, symbolizing completion. Very powerful, something that we really don't appreciate as much as we should. And the last point that I want to make while I'm on this little screenshot is here in the lineage, I just want for people to know themselves. It says here, this is an inaccuracy. It says that Matthew traces Jesus' lineage through David's son Solomon, while Luke traces it through David's son Nathan. Well, it's not David's son Nathan, it's David's son-in-law Nathan, right? Because Luke is the maternal line. So it's David's daughter that married into the house of Nathan. And I'm emphasizing this because I spoke with a friend just recently that gives Bible studies in her Sunday school. And she didn't know that the italicized words in the Bible are supplied. And so if people that give, this is someone I respect very much, and so I'm not saying this so much as a criticism, but just to point out that, just there's simple things that people don't know. And so the reason I say that is because when you read the book of Luke and you're reading the genealogy, and it says the son of Nathan, the son of David, and you see that the son of is italicized, it means it's a supplied word. It's not in the original text, in the Greek in this case. And so the English translators thought they were doing that. They thought that they were helping you along, but there's a lot of situations in the Bible where they don't. And so often, people should skip over the italicized words because in this case, it's not the son of David, it's the daughter of David. Okay, and so it's a simple thing, right? It's still a child of David, a child of Nathan, but it mixes people up like Alex and others that don't understand these little details. So where do we go from here? I think we covered the genealogy fairly well. The second point of contention that Alex makes really has to do with the Nativity account, right? The first few chapters of the Gospels. And so, here I just wrote down the flight to Egypt not being recorded in Luke. Well, there's a lot of things that are not recorded in a lot of places, right? And so let's listen to what Alex has to say, and then we'll break that apart.
Then we have, for example, the flight to Egypt, which is only recorded in Luke, which is difficult to reconcile with Matthew's account that they went to the temple in Jerusalem instead.
So Alex, here he has difficulty reconciling, these accounts, it's just he misspoke. If you noticed, the flight to Egypt takes place in Matthew, and then we have the temple dedication in Jerusalem. When Christ would have been 40 days old, that takes place in Luke. And I empathize with people, is what I want to say. Earlier, I was looking on Google Images, and I pulled up a picture that I'd like you to think about, right? So I typed in the Magi, the three kings, visit Jesus. And so, as you can see, what is the picture that comes up? It's a picture of the three kings in the manger. I hope that most of us know that this is not the biblical account, okay? So my point is that you just do a Google search and it shows you something that is inaccurate, okay? The Magi did not visit Christ until after he was dedicated at the temple, until after he was 40 plus days old. And so while it's nice to have this imagery, right, on Christmas, it's beautiful, but it throws a lot of us off. And so I empathize again with people when we have so many preconceived, ideas, images that are in our mind. So what I want to do is let's read the Bible for ourselves, and we'll see the story for ourselves. But to eliminate this, here's actually a good point that you guys are going to like. We're going to be reading the Nativity account just in Matthew and in Luke because it does not take place in Mark and in John, right? Okay, I highlighted this in the last video, but I just realized something while I was driving the other day that I'd never thought of before. And you're going to appreciate this. So Matthew and Luke record Christ as the Son of Man. They're showing his humanity, right? His paternal and maternal ancestry. Whereas Mark does not mention anything about his human ancestry, nor does John, but instead they focus on Christ as the Son of God. Mark chapter 1, verse 1, here is the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. He just jumps right straight into the point. And then John, we have the same thing. In the beginning was the Word, etc. And it's describing the relationship that Christ has with God, and that it is his Father. So that's his identity. Okay, so 2 of the Gospels, Son of Man, and 2, the Son of God. But then, this is what I noticed just the other day, think about Matthew and Luke have the natural, the fleshly birth, when he was born as a child in a manger, whereas Mark and John, what do they start with in Mark chapter 1 and John chapter 1, going into chapter 2? The baptism, right? Being born of the Spirit. Now we know that Christ was born of the Spirit, but here he's being imbued with the Spirit of his Father that comes down in the form of a dove, as it says. But that's just really cool. I never understood why Mark and John just jump into the baptism scene, but it makes complete sense when you have them divided in this sense. Okay, again, a harmonization, not a contradiction. This is intentional. Okay, we'll go from there. And so what I'm saying is that this just eliminates for our, when we want to understand the Nativity story, or the first years of Christ's life, we're not going to be looking at Mark and John. It's only in Matthew and in Luke. And what's neat here is that how it jumps back and forth between books. So you have to have both books in order to understand the full picture. And that's why Alex is confused. And I believe Alex is not really studying this for himself. I think people just often regurgitate what they hear from other people. And so we'll start in Luke chapter 1, and hopefully I can go through this quite rapidly. Starting in Luke chapter 1. Chapter 1 primarily talks about John the Baptist, but if you come down to verse 26, this is where you have the account of the angel Gabriel coming to Mary while she's in Nazareth and telling her that she is pregnant and that it's of the Spirit. But of course, you have to go to Matthew chapter 1 to read about this news coming to Joseph, and then Joseph having a hard time accepting this. But an angel comes to Joseph in a dream, and so Joseph receives this word, by faith, and he takes on Christ as his own. And then going back to Luke, now chapter 2. Let me take a screenshot here. Again, here's Joseph and Mary, and they're in Nazareth, as we saw in Luke chapter 1. And a decree is made by Caesar Augustus that a census is to be taken, or that the people are to be taxed, and that everyone is to go to their place of origin. And so, as we saw in the genealogies, Joseph and Mary being to the house of David, they go from Nazareth down to Bethlehem. And a lot of us know the story from here. Because of the census, there's a lot of people traveling. And so when they get to Bethlehem, there's no room for them to stay. And they as happens with pregnancy, can come on quite rapidly. And Jesus is born in a manger. And as was mentioned, the 3 magi are not there. But what we do find is that angels come to the shepherds that are out in the field, and the shepherds come to the manger and worship the Christ. So they're there to bear witness. As you continue going down, just building on this, the chronological events, if you read verse 21, it says here, on the 8th day was the time of circumcision. And then we come to verse 22, and when the time came for the purification rites required by the law of Moses, Joseph and Mary took Jesus to the temple in Jerusalem to dedicate him, to present him to the Lord. Well, this is all, the direction in the law of Moses is in Leviticus chapter 12, where it talks specifically about the circumcision being on the 8th day, talks about the purification rites, that them taking Christ to the temple would have been on his 40th day. It's different for males and females, but for a male child, it's on the 40th day. And so in our storyline now, we are up to day 40. And so now what we're going to do is jump back to Matthew chapter 2. And this is where we have the Magi. Okay, so we're after day 40. And for those that just are new to the Bible, because I want to reach people that don't know the Bible well, the word Messiah is Hebrew for anointed, and Christ is Greek for anointed. So they're the same word, just with different origins and language. So reading verse 1, okay, remember we're after day 40. It says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem, okay, just the general time, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east, okay, came to Jerusalem. So the three kings did not come initially to Bethlehem. They were led by the star, which a star in the Bible symbolically is also an angel. And so here they're led by this light in the sky to Jerusalem. And you can imagine these three kings that are probably, have different features and they're dressed differently. They would have caught a lot of attention. And they're going through the streets asking, where is the one to be that is to be born king of the Jews? This catches a lot of attention. And, when it gets to King Herod, it disturbs him, right? Because Herod doesn't want competition. And not only that, but if you look in history, if you just do like a Wikipedia search, Herod was extremely paranoid. He killed his own sons. He killed his own wife. He banished his other wife. He killed very high-ranking men. He had his secret police, his goons. This guy was not someone that you wanted to mess with. And so he doesn't want to lose power, okay, or in his image. And so he goes to his chief priests and he asks them, where's this Messiah to be born? And they say, in Bethlehem, in Judah, which is written in Micah chapter 5, verse 2. And so Herod, speaking to the Magi, say, when you find the child, come let me know so that I may also come to worship him. Obviously not being the case. But the Magi, they go on their way, and I imagine it being nightfall, and they are led to the house in Bethlehem, as it says in verse 11. And notice, I accidentally turned off doing a screenshot, I accidentally turned off the computer. Anyway, okay, so coming to verse 11, it says here, on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother, and they bowed and worshipped him, and they gave gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Well, they came to the house, and this makes sense. Again, Joseph and Mary are now establishing themselves in Bethlehem for a time, because Christ is born. Then there's a certain amount of time for the purification rites, etc. Joseph is an established man. He has savings. He has a developed trade. And anyway, so they're at a house. They've rented a house for all we know. And so the kings come, they worship him. And that night, the kings are told in a dream not to go back to Herod. And so they return another way, back to their home, back to their country. Herod, of course, is furious by this, and he's summoning his secret police to go to Bethlehem and the surrounding villages to kill the children. Okay, and at this point, Joseph, he's warned in a dream by an angel to get up and take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. And so, Herod going to kill the children in these villages. I think a lot of us can parallel this, or we know that this is a parallel to what we see with Moses. The Bible is full of parallelism, where you have the Pharaoh that ordered that all the children under 2 be killed. But a point that I wanted to make here, sometimes I'll hear historians say that, Herod never killed children that were in the surrounding villages of Jerusalem. By the way, Bethlehem is just 5 miles from Jerusalem, okay, very close. So it's not difficult for Mary and Joseph to walk to the temple to dedicate their child. It's a walk in the park for these guys because they do it all the time. Anyway, so people will say, well, there's no record of Herod, killing children in Bethlehem. And I don't expect there to be record, personally, because for multiple reasons. Think of countries today where there are people, where there's not the freedom of speech that we have here, and where when journalists, they disappear when they write bad things about their government or their leaders. And so, Herod, having the reputation that he does, just to read a little bit of his history, you're not going to be writing against this guy. And, you don't think of like Bethlehem as this 100,000 population, city, okay? It's a small village. My family in Spain, right? When we go to the village, there's just a handful of children there. And so it's not enough really to gain attention. And it's not enough for someone to write about, to stick their neck out and be killed for, if that makes sense. So anyway, that's just a thought that I have on that point. But I, how long were they in Egypt? I think that's a kind of a neat thing to ponder. Let me just have something to write on again here. Later, as we scroll down, we see that Joseph does not, later when Herod dies, is when Joseph receives another dream, and he takes Mary and Christ back to Nazareth, essentially. But Herod died in about 1 BC or 1 CE, okay? And we see that Christ was born in 4 BC, in the fall, and they would have left for Egypt in 3 BC. And so if they left for Egypt in 3 BC and they came back after Herod died, okay, either one of these two dates, then that was 2 or 3 years. I made a little happy face there unintentionally. So Christ was in Egypt for 2 or 3 years. If we were to read Wikipedia for ourselves, I pulled it up already, I was looking at it earlier. When you look at the life of Herod the Great, and you scroll down to his death right here, and then the dating of his death is where you find the reasoning for him dying in about 1 BC or 1 CE. There's more good things to read here. There's a section down here on the opinions of his reign that's pretty good. Something here that I just found a little interesting. When it here talks about his death, it says that Herod died in Jericho after an unidentified, excruciatingly painful, putrefying illness known to posterity as Herod's evil. And that for well over 1,000 years that this was referenced in other kingdoms. Herod suffered so much that he wanted to kill himself and wanted other people to kill him. And that just goes, that's not God inflicting that upon him. It's just, when you read the scriptures, when people remove themselves from God, the enemy can do pretty much anything that he wants. And so I wonder if that's a good place to end, just because I want to make these shorter. I think that's it. Okay, we have the Nativity story. Hopefully you can see it for yourself. So I want people to read for themselves the genealogy to understand the paternal and maternal lineage. And here we can understand the Nativity story for ourselves, so that people like Alex and others are not bamboozling people in that, saying that there's contradictions. When you read the scriptures, and this is not about proving to people what's right. The practical application in our life is, and this is the truth because this is exactly what I've gone through, okay? We have such dark times in our life, and we have such trials and hardship that sometimes in our weakest moments, some of us question God's love. We question God's judgment. It really throws our head upside down. And the only thing that really gives us a foundation is when we can read God's word for ourselves. And every time that we return to this and we see that it always, what's the saying? The Bible is an anvil that has worn out many hammers. When you can come to the Bible and see its strong foundation in this darkness, amidst the darkness that you're in, then you can believe the promises of God, and you can believe the love of God, and you can believe that, when God says that his understanding and his ways are higher than your ways. You can believe that, even though you can't see the answer, you can't see the solution to your problem. You can have faith and give God a chance to work a miracle in your life. And so, with that said, I want people to not lose faith, and again, it's about the practical lessons. That's what we're looking for. And so I'll stop the video at that. Thanks for listening. Until next time.